A crisis, planning for a crisis, and the role of corporate communications in the crisis. All right. So for those of you who speak Chinese here, I need your help. All right. Here, this is sort of one of these axioms in American corporate culture. Crisis is the combination of danger and opportunity. And that this character is a combination of these two. Is that correct?
Yeah.
For those of you who have the privilege of knowing another language in which this is in, is that a correct characterization?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll continue to use it then, if that's the case. Thank you. All right, so when there's a crisis, I guess it means that we have an opportunity. We're sitting at the arc of something dangerous and an opportunity to do something from that. Possible outcomes: you can triumph in a crisis, or you can have tragedy. And we know that, in essence, if we look at companies, if we look at just the recent example that we saw with Enron, that there is this possibility that things could go really, really well for a while, or they could go really badly. So what is a crisis in business? We're talking about an event or series of events that portend, I love that word, portend negative consequences for the individual, could be a CEO, or the group, the company, or a small, or the board, I should say, or the whole organization. All right, so a series of events that essentially could be really bad or negative for one person, a group of people, or the entire enterprise. Another way to look at crisis is an unstable situation of extreme danger or difficulty. Right? A crucial stage or turning point. We're reaching a crisis. We have an opportunity. We're sort of turning on an arc, turning on an axis here. A critical event, which, if not handled appropriately, can dramatically impact an organization's profitability, reputation, or ability to operate. Okay? Just some definitions to give you a sense as to when we talk about a company in crisis or an organization in crisis, what we're dealing with. A situation or condition with a high probability of leading to an emergency if left unaddressed. You don't do something about it, it's going to get worse. Classic crisis. And for many companies, we see that they look at events and they either wishfully hope things will go away, or we'll get to it a little bit later, or if it gets really bad, we'll address it then. And one thing about corporate crises is that they rarely get better. They tend to fester rather than go away and get better. Or a crisis could be any situation that the company that you want to change. So adopting this really expansive notion, this concept, this really expansive idea and view of crises, we can see that there are any number of events that can take place in the corporate world, in the workplace, that fit this definition. So let's think about it. A personal crisis. Again, and we saw some of that in the Enron case. But a personal crisis, resulting from the personal or individual actions, misdeeds, statements, foibles, or history of a key executive, a key leader, or a key employee in the organization. So I think it's fair to say that the executive who felt the need to essentially fall on his sword for that organization was experiencing a serious personal crisis. We often see that in the context of a corporate meltdown or series of events that affect the company, there will be any number of personal crises, usually for key executives. We saw a trader in that case, or chief financial officer, experiencing personal crisis, going through depression, etc. Legal crises, right? And you can have these can all be operating at the same time, interchangeably or interconnectedly as the events unfold. So a crisis brought about as a result of illegal or unlawful actions by a company or any individual within the company, which ultimately involves the courts. So you may have a crisis that starts off, as most of them do, with the discovery of some practice, but ultimately finds its way into the courts. As Langford was saying, ultimately the courts are going to decide their behavior. So why should these executives feel like they should be contrite or humble when they know at the end of the day they're going to spend 48 months or 60 months in a federal prison? Good question, but these legal crises do affect the way companies ultimately communicate to their very important stakeholders. Right? Financial crisis. Here you have a crisis resulting from poor financial performance, financial misfeasance, malfeasance, or financial wrongdoing by a key individual or the company itself. Again, we see this in the case of certainly Enron, but I think also we saw it in the case of the Arthur Andersen, which was a very key part of the Enron saga. We see financial crises affecting, and someone mentioned this, the entire financial services industry. When we had the problems with Wall Street just a couple of years ago. Right? So, and what about governance? Remember early on in our course we talked about what governance means in terms of a company. Governance typically is how a company decides, what the rules by which the company conducts its own operations. So our corporation has a set of governance principles. We have bylaws. We have guidelines. We have rules that say this is the way we have decided to conduct our business. And that, if we don't abide by our own rules, and by the way, governance also refers to some of the rules that have been imposed on public corporations by the government, by the regulators, by the Securities and Exchange Commission. There are certain rules that we have to play by. You've got to be transparent, etc. There's a whole host of those things. And we touched on some of those several weeks ago. But governance, if a company does not abide by its own governance or contravenes governance, it can set it into a crisis as well, some of which has to be explained. There are other kinds of crises that are brought about by a company's, I call them societal, a company's disobedience or transgression of widely held societal values. Disobedience or transgression of social mores and social beliefs. For example, when we see companies that are engaged in human rights violations or supporting human rights kinds of violations, discrimination, unfair labor conditions, exploitation of children in foreign countries, things that we as a society feel are just bedrock principles in our world. And when we see a corporation going through or not abiding by those principles, it can set about a certain crisis. Nike Corporation, and several years ago, when it was discovered that it was manufacturing its products in countries that had child labor. Recently, was it Apple? Apple went through the same sort of situation where its plant in Asia was seen as not being conducive to workers' rights and respecting those things. So these can set about crises small, crises large, externally generated crises. So something that is brought on by factors completely external to the company. Doesn't have to be something that we do as a company, CEO or not, but based on an alleged, perceived, or actual violation of some practice, belief, or law. So let's say that a company is going to be the target of an Occupy Wall Street kind of campaign. Right? They will find themselves in crisis. Not necessarily for what they do, maybe just for what they stand for, but not so much from a transgression or a practice of corporate governance issues or the like, but more for the fact that these other actors out here, advocates and activist groups, decided we're going to boycott these guys, or we're going to target them. We're going to get involved in a social media campaign that essentially lays out what they've been doing wrong for all this time. A web-based campaign. Right? Crises relating to the reputation, image, and perception of the company, derived from a persistent or prolonged negative perception in the media that this company just is not a good company to be around. Bad public opinion, public perception. What about governmental and administrative actions? So you've got a la Enron, a congressional investigation, a Securities and Exchange investigation, when you've got a company that is going to directly be involved under the microscope of a congressional panel or regulators. That can set about some crises. So let's say, hypothetically, that this happened, this congressional investigation happened way before Enron was unraveling. Maybe it was early on. And with the kind of performance that the CEO did, it's conceivable that this would have put the company into some sort of crisis where they have to explain all of its financial doings, all of its back and forth with respect to these exotic instruments that they were putting together. So just by asking the questions, an administrative body or governmental body can set up a company up. I don't know if you remember a little while ago when we had the bailout of the auto industry. I don't know if you guys remember that, but it wasn't that very long ago in Washington, where all of the heads of the major car companies came to Washington and testified. There's a famous picture of them all standing there, raising their hands, saying, I swear I'll tell the truth, etc. And one of the problems was that, so they're coming to Washington asking for a bailout of their industries in the billions of dollars, or hundreds of billions of dollars bailout, but they all flew first class. Not a good thing. I mean, flying first class is great. I like to fly first class if I can afford it anytime. But if I'm coming to Congress to ask them for a bunch of money, maybe I'll drive from Detroit. You know, I mean, you know, it might not be a
private plane that they took.
Private plane. I'm sorry, private plane, first class. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the correction.
No, I remember this because of that.
Yes. So they took their private planes and they decided to come to Washington and ask for money. Again, not really positive communication. I mean, just their actions alone in that suggest that somebody wasn't thinking very well. So, again, be careful when you have to face a governmental or administrative body. Everything is on the table there. What about acts of God? You know, acts of God. A crisis resulting from a force majeure, act of God. Hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunami can cause interruptions in your supply chain. can completely undo your market for your goods. If you're selling, if you're in the business of selling timber and there's a forest fire, destroys your crop, or agriculture where the crop freezes over, it's nobody's fault. Good Lord has left us with weather, and we have to deal with it. So, but certainly, a crisis can ensue from those kinds of events. What other kinds of things can happen when bad things can happen to good companies? High-profile lawsuits may not have necessarily have any merit. Let's see. What's the very sort of used to be cutting-edge company, clothing company, with that has all of the very stark images of colorful images of. It's a clothing company. They have a store here in Georgetown somewhere. Benetton. Benetton. United Colors of Benetton. Not long ago, I think Benetton had experienced some problems because of the perception that it was upholding an image, and it was not employing certain types of people because those people didn't fit the image of the company. High-profile lawsuit. I think they got sued. Whether it was settled, I think probably ultimately settled. But the fact that the lawsuit was brought shined, brought a lot of light to the company. That was negative. Discrimination claims. Walmart, right? Largest class action lawsuit in the history, filed by women. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, the class of women employees lost at that iteration of the lawsuit, but it put Walmart as under the microscope as a company that no matter how much money you save there, and I love Walmart, don't get me wrong, I like going to Walmart because you feel like you can buy almost anything in there, right? But nothing's too important, nothing's too expensive here. I mean, whoa, I can buy it. But their labor practices are another thing altogether. So, sexual harassment. All you have to do is raise the issue. Company's going to be talking about that more than anything else. Right? Not to suggest that a sexual harassment claim is not legitimate. Forget about the merits. I'm just talking about the fallout at the end that you've got to communicate later on. Product recalls. We manufacture tires, but the last batch of tires we made, they're not quite up to par. And if you put them on your car and you drive over 45 miles an hour, you could have a blowout and die. Sorry. Okay, so product recalls. What does that do to that company? Stock may go down for a little while. Consumers may not remember anything else about the company, except that if you go over 45 miles an hour, this could happen to you. And oh, by the way, I'm not going to buy those. I'm going to put my family, my little newborn child and my wife and kids in the back seat. I'm not going to put them on those tires. All right? Companies have had to deal with crisis. What happens if somebody dies from the use of your product? Your food product, your health product, crisis. What about big protests and strikes? Crisis. What about when coworkers decide to come to blows? That happens from time to time. What about insider trading? We know about that now. Martha Stewart, one of my favorite people in the world. I love Martha Stewart. I like her gumption. I like her innovation. I just like Martha Stewart. She went to jail for insider trading. She went to jail. She went to jail for insider trading because somebody in her company gave her a tip, or maybe she traded on some information. Head of a company, Martha Stewart Omni Media or something like that. She goes to jail. Her company was in crisis for years after that. I'm not sure if it ever has recovered since then. What about intellectual property infringement? Trace was talking about earlier about IP, intellectual property. You steal somebody's patent. Look, Google, Microsoft, and all the technology companies are always going to war over infringement. Now, whether it reaches the stage of a crisis, who knows? But it could. Let's say that, and let's go to the entertainment world for a minute. Let's say you're a popular artist, Beyonce, your girl, and she's accused of stealing somebody's lyrics or song, or taking that principle or what have you, the basics, putting her own little spin on it, and then profiting immensely. Well, she's not a publicly traded company, but she's a pretty big industry unto herself. Could be a crisis if that were found. Her brand could substantially be reduced to dull. Same with producers. Same with not long ago James Cameron, I think, the famous producer, was alleged to have taken somebody's ideas for one of his, I think it was the, not Fantasia.
Avatar?
Avatar, thank you. And tell what era I come from. All right. So, I'm not sure what the result was, but he took a hit. Embezzlement, mergers, acquisitions, takeovers. What about when a key executive dies? Steve Jobs, rest his soul. Man, innovative leader of the company. Apple now, some might argue, could be in a stage of prolonged crisis. Key person dies, and so how do you, as a corporate communication professional and expert, which I'm assuming you are, because you're here, how do you handle these various crises in a communication context? Each one is a little different. Each one requires a different kind of approach. There are others. What happens when your CEO commits a crime? Do you distance yourself like some of you have suggested? You draw a ring around the CEO and say, well, he was our CEO. We followed him all the way up until he started taking a lot of money. He's no longer with us. CEO commits a crime. Send his butt to jail and let the company move on. What happens if you're Twitter or Google or any service provider and you go down for more than 15 minutes? Amir, you got a company that's everybody's when Blackberry went down not long ago, maybe a year, whenever they went down. Blackberry goes down. It's the lead story on the nightly news. Hundreds of thousands of Blackberry users across the eastern seaboard lost contact with their, messages were lost, never to be delivered. Crisis. Data breaches, compromised data, hackers. How many of you on Evernote? Hackers. They just hacked. I'm just getting used to Evernote. I'm trying to figure out how to use it. I love it. And now I gotta do another password, man. Come on. Okay, hackers, and they hack everything. How about the hackers who just hacked into this website? I never found out what website it was. With all the celebrities and Michelle Obama? What website was that, by the way?
I think
they took their financial information. They
put
took
it on
their
the website. I forgot which one it was.
Okay, so crisis. if it was a legitimate company, this was a site, so I don't know, I never heard the name of the site. A legitimate company, like, you know, you name it, could be a crisis. People could then remember that and say, I'm not going to go on that site anymore. And there goes their advertising revenue and poof. Privacy breaches. What about downsizing? When you got to cut a bunch of people, like the airlines. Crisis. What happens when maybe a competitor has a crisis in your industry, and then people look around and say, well, the whole thing is like the financial services industry. What about when your celebrity spokesman gets into a scandal? What if you decided for your company's image is going to be Justin Bieber? Be a believer?
Believer.
Believer?
That's what they call people.
Believer.
Yeah.
Be a believer.
Yeah.
All right. And Justin is about to go crazy right now because he's just too young. He's got, you know, he's just a young man growing up in front of everybody. But he's your company spokesman, and he just beat up the paparazzi. All 97 pounds of it. All right, could be a crisis. Your face of your company is Lindsay Lohan. Poor choice, but it could happen.
Did you just motion towards me when you said that?
No! You are from California, though,
I
right?
know.
Okay. No, but I wasn't thinking about it. I just said Lindsay Lohan. All right, so, but Lindsay's had her share of problems. Crisis. Non-union work, environmental claims. I should have asked Vaughn about this, about the fashion industry. When not long ago we had some fashion spokespeople who were they were celebrities whose brand was tarnished because they themselves were involved in some issues. Okay, so I just want to paint a series of, to give you a sense of the kinds of things that can go wrong in a company. There may be others. And as you live and breathe and we get into a different kind of, a different era, particularly social media, a crisis now cannot be easily contained. It has to be addressed. There was a time way before you were born, and maybe not so long ago, where a crisis could perhaps be sort of contained. You could draw a circle around it and kind of manage it. Today, it will unfold almost in real time. Any one of those 20 or so possibilities happen to your company, it's likely that someone in your company is going to be tweeting it to the rest of the world. Somebody in your own company is going to be Facebooking it. Okay? So that sets about an entirely different set of challenges for you guys as communications professionals. So what we'll do when we come back is we're going to talk about some of the responses and some of the strategies that you can use to address these crises going forward.